Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, AARP Wisconsin, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.
Tony Evers of Madison is a Democratic candidate for governor. He's currently the superintendent of public instruction. The election is November 6th. Superintendent, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Thanks, Steve. It's good to be with you.
Election 3 weeks from tomorrow. What's your closing final day's argument to Wisconsin voters?
Well, the final argument is this. We've been campaigning, Mandela Barnes and myself, since the primary. It's all about making sure that we understand and value the things that Wisconsinites feel are important, whether it's education, whether it's roads, healthcare, issues that are basic Wisconsin issues. They're not Democratic or Republican issues. And so the closer is this. We're going to be talking about that until November 6th. Those issues are very important to the people.
You announced over the weekend your middle class tax cut.
Right.
Targeted most on households with AGIs of less than 100,000.
Right.
But with those of AGIs of less than 150 also getting some benefit.
Right.
Now, you'd pay for it by scaling back the manufacturing and ag tax break.
That's right.
Now, you'd get about $300 million of that you could apply to the income tax.
Right.
From the manufacturing and ag.
Right. Absolutely.
Here's my question. If you're using $300 from manufacturing and ag, how do you pay for the $600 million upper for special ed that you've also promised is going to be part of your next budget?
Well, as you know, Steve, any budget, whether it's been with a Democratic governor or a Republican governor, it's always been about priorities, and that will continue to be the case. So indeed, we will be able to pay for that the middle class tax cut, which is critical. I mean, in Wisconsin, United Way just showed us that we have 870,000 families, working families, that can't afford the basics. So they need a break, and that's always being fair in taxes is really important to me. And so we're going to take this on, and we believe that we're going to be able to find other areas to pick up those $43 million. In addition, in our K through 12 budget, again, it is a budget that gets us to a point where we're actually caring about our kids with special education needs and students with disabilities. Mm-hmm. We have high need in the state of Wisconsin, and Scott Walker, frankly, has never understood that, especially since he took $800 million out of the budget when he first came in. We're still catching up, and so in order for us to have a high quality education system in the state of Wisconsin, we're going to have to set priorities. But we will also be using the tax levy credit that normally goes to schools indirectly. We're going to make sure they get it directly.
Going to 2/3, as you would like to do, I think the estimate from the latest estimate, that's just that from the Fiscal Bureau, an upper of between 100 and 130 million. So you're also going to find a way to pay for that in addition to the 600 more for special ed, sir?
Well, believe me, the legislature found $4 billion of fund Foxconn, and that just took a nanosecond. We will fight it. It's always been about priorities, and the people of Wisconsin have said it. In the recent Marquette polls, they show that people want to have more resources for their K through 12 system, and we're going to deliver on that promise.
If you're going to target your tax cut on those with adjusted gross incomes of $150,000 and less, mm-hmm. Are you going to recommend an increase in taxes paid by those 5% of households that earn more than $150,000?
No, this is targeted. We are not looking to increase anybody's income taxes. This is targeted as a cut to those hardworking men and women and their families in the state of Wisconsin that need a break and had never have gotten a break for the last 8 years.
So you won't adjust on those making more than $150,000 AGI?
No, we're going to be looking specifically at the manufacturing and agricultural tax. We believe we will get most of the way there by making sure that after $300,000 that is scaled back.
Okay. You mentioned Foxconn. Are Foxconn promises to build high-tech centers in Green Bay and Eau Claire and Racine and invest $100 million in UW-Madison's R&D good for Wisconsin, or don't you trust the company to make good on those promises?
There's been asterisks after every decision that they've made, whether it's they're going to build a screen this big or a screen this big, or the plant's going to be this big or this big. You know, buying empty buildings in Green Bay or Eau Claire, that doesn't, the proof is in the pudding. This is a work in progress. And so my goal as governor is to make sure that they're the best corporate citizens possible. We need to make sure that that the environmental regulations are covered, and instead of assuming that they're going to do that. So we're going to hold their feet to the fire on a number of things. Frankly, I think people in southeast Wisconsin do need jobs and do need good paying jobs. But the governor hasn't held them to any accountability on, whether they're a minority business owner or women business owner. The same thing that happened with the Milwaukee Brewers, the Milwaukee Bucks, all the controversial public-private partnerships we've had in the past. We've given help to the minority business owners and women business owners of southeast Wisconsin, as well as the apprentices and the workers. Nothing is being held. There's nothing on Foxconn. We're going to renegotiate that part of it. That is critical to the state.
Well, that's my question. If you're elected, the first meeting you have with one or two key Foxconn executives, what's going to be your first questions for them, sir?
Just that. How are you going to help the people in southeast Wisconsin that they're either unemployed or underemployed, have good paying jobs? How will you guarantee me as governor that the environmental protections that the rest of the state clearly believes are important? How are you going to convince me of that? How are you going to convince me that taking 7 million gallons out of water out of Lake Michigan won't go back in a way that's going to be detrimental to the entire eastern shoreboard of the state of Wisconsin? Those are real basic things that, frankly, were left on the table in this rush to subsidize a foreign country. They need to be held accountable for some really important things.
Are you afraid, just one more question on Foxconn, are you afraid that Foxconn would dramatically, significantly scale back what it says or its plans for centers across Wisconsin if you're elected governor, sir?
I don't think so. I think they do want to be good corporate citizens. They just haven't been asked to be good corporate citizens. So that's what I'm going to be asking them. In this rush to make sure that he got something in place by this election day, so many things have been left unsaid, and we continue, as I said before, asterisk after asterisk. The $100 million that went to UW-Madison, that's just a pittance of what we're giving them. I mean, in my checkbook, it's a hell of a lot of money. But
Madison's got to match that, correct?
Right.
Excuse me for interrupting.
Yeah, and they have to match that. But again, that's nothing compared to the $4 or $5 billion this is actually costing the taxpayers in Wisconsin.
The Foxconn package led Kimberly-Clark to ask for similar tax breaks.
Right.
If the Senate votes on that in November, do you hope it's defeated? Is that good public policy?
Well, it's something that the state has to look at going forward, how much they can subsidize companies in the state of Wisconsin. But here's my point of irritation about this issue. Scott Walker's known that this has been on the table for months and months and months and months. I mean, this isn't a new thing in Appleton. He could have resolved it then. He didn't resolve it, and now we're going to pass the buck until after the election. Mm-hmm. That's not leadership. No, I'm not going to sign on to any deal. I don't know what the deal is, and clearly there's not enough support on the Republican side, so there's going to have to be some negotiation and thoughtfulness about this. But at the end of the day, think about what Walker has done to the hardworking people that work at that plant. And it's not news that they're in trouble, and it's not news that this is going to be an issue. And so for months, he's let people just kind of hanging out there, and now we're going to solve it after the election. I just think it was bad leadership.
Do you know enough about the deal to know if you were governor whether you'd sign that Kimberly-Clark tax package into law?
I'm not going to comment on any deal that hasn't been cut yet, because clearly it's still a moving target. So I'm not going to comment on that until I know what the deal is.
Let's move on to health care.
Sure.
Will your first budget as governor seek the federal cash to expand our MA program?
Absolutely. And if your viewers think about this, Walker didn't take that MA money, the Medicaid money, when he was running for president, because it would make him look that he's for the Affordable Care Act, and that wouldn't help him running for governor. So he spends $90 million in 6 weeks to get 0.5% of the vote. That's a bad investment. All that kind of humor aside, that had direct impact on the state of Wisconsin. It cost us hundreds of millions of dollars. Our health insurance is higher than it is in neighboring states, especially Minnesota. And it was just a mistake. Other Republican governors have taken it. He did not, because he was running for president. We pay more here. It was a bad deal. And on top of it, pre-existing conditions, that's up in the air, no matter what Scott Walker says, because he's in federal court right now to get rid of Affordable Care Act. Part of the Affordable Care Act is pre-existing conditions. We have 2.4 million people in the state of Wisconsin, me included, I'm one of them, that have pre-existing conditions. They need those protections. I've asked Scott Walker to say, you know, if you're that serious about pre-existing conditions, get the heck out of that lawsuit. Why are you even bothering with that? And there's always no response. Just the response is, I don't know, we'll figure it out later. We're going to figure it out in my watch right away. We're going to take that money. We're going to absolutely promise the people in Wisconsin we're going to protect pre-existing conditions.
Because of the questions over pre-existing conditions, if the legislature comes back in extraordinary session, would you welcome then both houses agreeing on the bill that passed the Assembly but not the Senate, guaranteeing that no insurer could deny coverage because of pre-existing conditions?
It would have to be rock solid, and I don't believe that piece of legislation was rock solid. It's rock solid in the Affordable Care Act, and it's not rock solid in that. So I'd have to see that. I'd work with whomever to make it happen, but for gosh sakes, again, why be hypocritical about it? You're in court, you're in federal court saying, wipe it off, ACA. I mean, that's why he ran for president. He was against the Affordable Care Act. He said that time and time again. That gives me no hope that his plan is to keep those protections.
Would your first budget as governor include a Badger Care buy-in option for those whose incomes are now too high to participate in it?
I think that
Badger
would be,
Care for All, that's been called.
yes,
Excuse me.
I think the first budget's probably a stretch. We have lots of priorities. I think a public option down the road is something we should be looking at, because I'm not, it'll never be a mandate, it'll never be that, but it would be something that on the exchange that some people could actually access. I think after we make these changes with taking the Medicaid money and making sure we set up the exchange as well, keep the pre-existing conditions, then we'll be in a better position to see how that would happen. But at the end of the day, there are going to be people in the state that just flat out cannot, don't qualify over here, don't qualify over there. We may need to have a public option for
But
that.
maybe not in the first budget proposal.
Unlikely.
Are you hearing from hospitals and other medical providers that our MA reimbursement rates are too low and that it threatens care under the MA program? Would your first budget include an increase in MA reimbursement rates?
Yes, they would, and yes, I hear that all the time. Reimbursement rates are too low, and we need to make sure that our providers stay in business and are able to treat all the people that come to their doors. So yes, I'm sure we will find some way to increase the reimbursement rates there.
Why not announce your highway funding long-range plan until the day you would take the oath of office?
Yeah.
That allows the Republicans, as you've heard, to say, you don't know what it's going to cost your drivers, potentially $1 more per gallon.
Yeah.
Why wait until potentially January?
Well, I just have to first of all say it's absolutely ridiculous to say that it's going to be $1 per gallon.
You can say now it won't be $1 per gallon.
Good Lord, no. It never would have been. And even Mark Gottlieb, former Department of Transportation Secretary, says that's just fear-mongering, and that's all it is. It's diverting ourselves from the fact that Scott Walker has absolutely failed in transportation policy, and 20% of the transportation budget now is debt service, which eventually goes to New York City, and lots of people are making money out there. We have to change that. So it's all part of a diversionary plan. You think about it. Scott Walker likes to say he hasn't raised taxes, but as a result of his poor public policy in a number of areas, and I'll use this one as an example, we have 20 municipalities having user fees or wheel taxes. Those are Scott Walker taxes because the state hasn't done what they need to do. So as far as clearly identifying this is where the money's going to come from, or this is what's going to be cut. You don't go into negotiations saying, okay, I have the answer. Would you all please come together and we'll solve this? I'm going to do what I've always done as an educator, and that's bring people together. We will talk it through. We'll reach some conclusions, but I'm not going to preset any conditions. We're going to have a good conversation about how this is going to happen. And you know, you've heard Republicans across the state talk about, you know, they're feeling the pressure too. They have been unable to, frankly, vote their conscience on this issue. There's Republicans that do want to fix this, and we can fix this. We're going to bring it together. I'm going to have no preset conditions, though.
When you say everything's on the table, gas tax, the $75 you and I pay to register our vehicle, and tolling, is there anything you want to rule out right now?
No, and cuts too. There could be cuts.
What about mileage based, where you tell the DOT how many miles you travel? Is that part of it?
It's anything's on the table, and except for $1 a gallon. I mean, we don't want to be ridiculous, but reasonable approaches to solving this problem are on the table. We can't be 44th or 45th in the country in our infrastructure, in our transportation. We can't have bridges collapsing suddenly because we haven't figured out how we're going to do it. People in Wisconsin are reasonable people. Legislators are reasonable people. Governor Walker has not been reasonable on this issue, and that's why we're going to succeed. I feel very confident that Republicans and Democrats can come up with a solution. And won't the people of Wisconsin be happy after all these years of fighting that we finally have a bipartisan agreement on something? We can make this happen.
You're in a too close to call race with Governor Walker. It's dead heat, whatever the term is.
Sure.
Here's my question. Have you started convening some of these special interest groups on transportation to come up with a plan? You could be elected governor 3 weeks from tomorrow.
Sure.
Have you started this internal debate?
I have met with all sorts of transportation, both consumers and road builders and people that finance it and engineers. I met with lots of them, and they all agree that we have to do something. It's imperative. And it includes the people that want greater bike paths and making sure that we have good public transportation. This isn't always about building big roads. This is about our infrastructure. Yes, but we have not talked about, because I said, I'm waiting till I'm elected. We're going to get people together, and then we're going to be talking together how we're going to solve this.
Well, but you've heard the Republicans say he's not telling you until he takes the oath of office because it's going to really hurt you. And your response?
My response is baloney. In those discussions, we'll have them in open session. I don't care what it is. People will be able to know exactly where we're going. But at the end of the day, what we do know is we can't continue on the way we're going now.
Your next budget, if you're elected, for the Department of Corrections. Waupun and Green Bay were built in the 1800s. There was this discussion before the primary about whether we could cut our inmate population in half. Do you believe we can? Question one. Question two, do we need a new state prison?
What we need is a change in philosophy around corrections, and that philosophy is this, is that nonviolent offenders, we should have some alternatives for them. And the number of them, it doesn't make any difference. Lots of red states have done this. They've figured out that investing in rehabilitation, investing in alcohol and other drug abuse programming, investing in rehabilitation services and mental health services is far better as far as the people that are involved, and also the rate that they reoffend, if we focus on that. That's what we have to do. Tommy Thompson talked about it in his when he talked about his book, his new book that he's putting out. One of his chief regrets is building a bunch of prisons and filling them up. We need to find ways to make sure that nonviolent offenders, those that are not a danger to society, have an opportunity to be rehabilitated without incarceration. And by doing that, we create a much broader workforce right off the bat, and it's going to be cheaper. There's a reason Texas and South Carolina have done it. Republicans get it because they say, we're going to save money. Others say it because it's morally the right thing to do. I'm in both those camps, frankly. If we can save money and have a savings dividend around corrections reform, we can use that for other issues.
If elected governor, would you make it a priority addressing the fact that Wisconsin leads the nation in the incarceration rate for African Americans?
Absolutely. There is a race issue in the state of Wisconsin, and we see it in our school settings, and we see it in corrections. the governor has to speak out on this. It's a very uncomfortable position for Wisconsinites to understand that race is making having people make wrong decisions around people. So yes, yes, the correctional and social justice issues are very important to me, and they're very important to the people of Wisconsin, whether Republican or Democrat. We can save money, we can remain safe, but it's not being hard on crime. We're stupid on crime right now. I think we need to be smart on crime, and being smart is investing in rehabilitation. It's far cheaper than incarceration.
The 4-year graduation rate for Milwaukee Public School is about 60%, as you know. How would you improve that as governor?
Well,
4 years out,
yeah.
you'd want it to be what?
Oh, I'd want it to be as close to the state average as possible. But the thing that we continue to struggle with as a society is understanding how all these issues are connected, whether it's health care, whether it's poverty, whether it's transportation. Of course, it is partial education, making sure that we have the highest quality teachers and principals in those buildings and have enough revenue, making sure that students with disabilities are getting the services they need. But if you, and Aaron Richards just wrote about it in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel recently. The issue of like churning, mobility of students, really impacts a student's learning. What affects mobility? Poverty, evictions, making sure that they have good transportation. All those things are part of solving the achievement gap, but also solving some major issues in the state of Wisconsin in and above education. That's why I'm running for governor, to make sure that we have the best education system possible. But they're all connected. All those issues are connected, and we have to understand that and attend to all of them.
There was a group announced last week, Conservation Voters for You. My question is, in your first budget, would you recommend giving the authority to appoint the DNR secretary back to the board and not the governor?
Indeed, and the good news for the people of Wisconsin is that science will be brought back to our state. Instead of pushing it aside and not making decisions based on science, that's my background for starters. I used to be a science teacher. I have a degree in the science area. But most importantly, we will put scientists back into the Department of Natural Resources. I would propose that we have an independent DNR secretary, and I know that means a lot to a governor to give up a position that you have authority over, and have an independent board. I think decisions are best made especially when we look outwardly in the state of Wisconsin. Water is a good example. It is one of our most, besides our kids and grandkids, it's our most important resource. And we continue to struggle in that area, whether it's around lead pipes or whether it's around high-capacity wells in central Wisconsin, or how large farms impact groundwater in Kewaunee County. All those things are critical that we have a science-based decision-making there. Additionally, I will say, one of the downfalls of Scott Walker's time in office is they went from a party of local control to a party of state control. And this plays out every single day in our discussion on natural resources, where whether it's shoreland preservation or something else, they pass 160, maybe even more laws in 8 years to kind of take back that authority and ability to have a say in their future from locals.
Well, as a former science teacher, does Wisconsin have a role in fighting climate change? Would your first budget address that in some way, and if so, how?
Well, we're going to address it in a way that I just talked about, bringing science back to the Department of Natural Resources.
Okay.
But yeah, it's not a matter of believing in science, climate change anymore. It's here. And so we need to address it. At some point in time, I'm hopeful to join the group of states that have adopted the climate change parameters for states. And I think that would be a good way for us to kind of move forward in this issue. And also I'm hopeful that our public service people that make decisions about public utilities will join us in that effort. I'm sure they will. They get it. They know that it's important for them to be good stewards also.
We have not set as a state a new renewable energy standard.
Right.
Do you know what any ideas on what a new standard should be?
I'll be working with people. We do need a new standard, and I'll be working with people on that. I'm not in a position right now to say what that would be, but we have to make sure that we leave our state in a good place for our children going forward and our grandkids.
Last week, the new president of AFL-CIO was in, and I was fortunate enough to interview her. And she said she would ask you as governor to try and reverse all the major anti-labor changes over the last 8 years. Act 10, prevailing wage, right to work, and then she listed them.
Sure.
Yet, Assembly Speaker Voss said if he returns as Speaker, he will not participate, their House will not repeal any of these changes. How do you thread that needle?
Well, of course we're in election year, right? And so I'm assuming that cooler heads will prevail. But in turn, and we'll just talk about Act 10 for a second. Obviously, I was opposed to it. I've talked about this a lot of times. I'm not sure that repeal is going to end up on my desk anytime soon unless we have some major changes in the legislature. So I think it's more important, especially with the Act 10 piece, is that we start treating our teachers and others public employees with respect and give them a voice in their workplace. Things that, frankly, yes, collective bargaining and money mean a lot, but dividing and conquering, that doesn't help. When Scott Walker essentially said, I'm going to make an enemy out of the people that work for me, that's just bad public policy. That doesn't work in the public sector. That doesn't work in the private sector. And so we're going to reverse that. We're going to make sure people are respected and their opinions are respected. But in relative to the private sector, I think we can get some changes in the right to work and prevailing wage piece going forward. I think there were people that didn't realize how important both those were to the employers in both cases, and I think we'll be revisiting those two, and we may have a different result.
Act 10, two major focuses: the collective bargaining piece, making public employees pay more for health and pension.
Right.
Do you think public employees are paying their fair share now for health care and pension coverage, sir?
Sure, and I think they would have anyway without all the rigmarole that we had. That said, yes, I think they do pay. I think they do pay a fair share. I see wages diminishing, and we're not making great headway there. But the end of the day, most employees that work for public service, they want reasonable work, load of work, and workload. And I'd say there are places, such as in our correctional institutions, where that's not the case. I think people are really being stressed there. But they also want to be respected. And when you have a governor that compares kindergarten teachers to fighting ISIS when he was running for president, I mean, that's just a ridiculous thing to say, and people remember that. I can tell you that. I go around the state now and I talk to a kindergarten teacher and she'll bring it up. We're not ISIS, we're kindergarten teachers. And so that's just, it's a sad reflection on our state, and it's causing, many fewer people going into the profession. We have places in Wisconsin where second grade teachers are hard to find. That would have never happened if Scott Walker hadn't taken them on like that.
Well, while we're talking about schools, next step in helping Wisconsin's rural schools, which cover such a broad areas,
right.
What are your thoughts on the next steps to help rural schools?
Well, certainly we have to continue to increase the sparsity and that came, frankly, from our department a long time ago, and I'm proud of that move. But also, we need to make sure that they get their fair share of just general funding. I mean, there's no reason why those schools should have to go to referendum every year, every 3 years to just keep the doors open. So that's an issue. But also, again, all these things are intertwined. How do we get broadband? How do we get to the point where we believe every kid, every family in the state of Wisconsin has access to good broadband? We don't have that belief right now. I mean, the people of Wisconsin have it. In the political arena, that is not exact. We don't have that. So if we want to have a robust rural environment, we have to have broadband in every home. We also have to have a strong school system, which is a cultural kind of mecca of each and every district in our rural, isolated areas. Those are the things we have to protect, and frankly, those are the things we need to do going forward. Scott Walker dropped the ball when he was thinking about running for president. He didn't take the internet money that we could have had, and now we're having a severe problem around that. We need to make sure that broadband at some point in time is as valuable and important as having electricity.
Part of the funding with our K-12 schools, you watch schools deal with per per pupil revenue limits.
Right.
Will your first budget call for ending those revenue limits plus levy limits on local governments, sir?
We will not be removing the revenue limits. We will be putting most of the money in the categorical aid, which are outside those limits,
Yes.
which will give them great flexibility, especially in the area of special education. At some point in time, we need to make sure that local governments do have some more authority than they do now, especially our counties and municipalities. That's a problem. I know school districts is a problem, but you know, they got to plow the roads. They got to fix the potholes, or scot holes as we call them now, and they're just not getting it. Milwaukee County sends a bunch of money to the state government, and they get very little back. And so we need to rethink that partnership between counties and townships and school districts in the state of Wisconsin. It's going to take some time, but I've made commitments to the counties and municipalities and towns to let's re-examine that. Let's re-examine that, because they're the ones that do the hard work. It's not at the state level. They're doing it.
A few weeks ago, the governor said he saw, quote, no value, close quote, in visiting prisons.
Yes.
What would be your own schedule in visiting prison? Well, I assume you would be visiting our prison?
I'm going to be visiting Lincoln Hills the week I'm inaugurated for governor. I think, you know, you think about it, we spend more in our correctional institutions than we do in the University of Wisconsin system. And the governor needs to know. Of course, you have to have a good secretary. I'm not denying that. But the governor needs to hear what's going on from both the people that are incarcerated and, frankly, the people that are working there. That's an important part of being governor. Managing state government is critical. It just doesn't happen. And frankly, we saw what happens when you don't have a good handle on what happens, and that's in Lincoln Hills. What a mess. We're still paying a price for it, and we'll continue to pay a price for that, for essentially neglect.
Okay, just a couple more questions.
Sure.
The UW system budget, you don't support extending the freeze on resident undergrad for the 7th and 8th year, correct?
I didn't vote for that budget because they didn't ask for any additional state money. That was the problem. I'd be glad to put enough money in the system so that they can actually reduce their budgets. But as a Board of Regent member, I couldn't in good faith say, oh, by the way, we're going to freeze, but we're not going to ask for more money, or we really aren't going to know what that is until some other time. I couldn't do that. And so the fact that the Board of Regents decided not to clearly articulate what their expectations were of the state of Wisconsin, I couldn't vote for that.
Okay, election 3 weeks from tomorrow. Biggest difference between you and the incumbent you're challenging?
Well, certainly, I believe the biggest difference is that we have two completely different visions of the future. And mine is one that is bringing people together, solving problems that the people of Wisconsin have articulated. It's around schools, natural resources, making sure that we have good health care, all those things. I've seen Scott Walker operate as a typical politician for the last 8 years. He's running for president, he's doing this. And his decisions, his public policy decisions, have hurt our state. We have high health care costs. We have crumbling roads, and we have schools that have had $800 million taken out of them. There's a huge difference between us on how we will govern.
Tony Evers, Superintendent of Public Instruction and the Democratic candidate for governor. The election is November 6th. Tony, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet.
Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, AARP Wisconsin, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal Sentinel.